Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Nostalgia Trap. I'm your host, David Parsons. Very excited to bring you another episode here. If you're looking for more, I have a little bit of information to share with you about where to find more episodes, and there'll be many more exciting ones that I got lined up in future weeks. I would say the best place to go is nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. Libsyn, Libsyn, is the site that's hosting these episodes. You can also go to Stitcher.com. That's Stitcher. And you can download an app to put on whatever device you got, and that app can be used to download all sorts of great podcasts, including this one. You can also find the podcast on iTunes, and if you are on Facebook, you can like the Nostalgia Trap page for new episodes and updates on all sorts of stuff. So I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Today, my guest is James Hoff. James Hoff is someone that I met originally at the CUNY Graduate Center when we were both working on our graduate degrees, him in English and me in history. I was aware of James mainly for two reasons. One, as one of a small but significant contingent of Californians that had made their way to the CUNY Graduate Center, specifically Southern Californians. James is from Orange County, and he has plenty of things to correct about my assumptions about Orange County, having grown up a little bit further north in Ventura. So we talk a little bit about Orange County and his relationship to California and how he eventually made his way to New York City. And it's a long, strange trip for him, and he's got a lot to tell. James is also someone who, was the editor of the school paper. The newspaper is called the GC, or the Graduate Center Advocate. And James certainly, made that paper live up to its title when he was the editor-in-chief during the years that I was at the Graduate Center. His editorials and his choice of material was, unquestioningly radical and working class oriented and supportive of graduate students and adjuncts and all the people in academia that are struggling to make it during this so-called crisis of higher education. So James has a really strong voice. He's now someone whose writing appears in publications like the Huffington Post and Inside Higher Ed, and he was actually the subject of a quite romantic little profile in the New York Times in January, and I'll post a link to that on the Facebook page and in the blog. That kind of profiled the plot of the adjunct professor in American life, and specifically in New York City with relation to the City University of New York, who employs 60% of the courses taught at CUNY are taught by adjuncts who have no health insurance, no job security, and make disgustingly low amount of money. And I can tell you that because I've been an adjunct at CUNY for the last 9 years. And it's an experience that got me through graduate school, but is currently barely paying the bills. And we talk about that experience. We talk about his working class identification and how that affects his own kind of orientation towards these issues. And James has a lot to say about the 15 Now movement, which is something that he's been involved in promoting, and I think believes in very, very strongly, as do I. And he kind of educated me a little bit about that. And hopefully very soon, James and a few of the main leaders of that movement, the 15 Now movement, to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, are going to come on the show, and we'll do a special topic related show around the 15 Now movement with James and a few others very soon. So look forward to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and again, you can pick up lots more stuff at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. Download the Stitcher app and put some podcasts on there. Like the Facebook page, and you'll get new episodes when they come out. I hope you enjoy this conversation between me and James Hoff. So my experience with you has been here at the Graduate Center, and we've worked together at Baruch a little bit, but I wanted to sit down and find out a little more about you and your background and how you came to be the person you are. Because when I was here, you were the newspaper guy. You were the Advocate editor. How long did you do that?
I think I was editor of The Advocate for 5 or 6 years. I can't remember now. But it was, I think, 2005 through 2012, so maybe it was 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, for me, I mean, I feel kind of naive in the sense that I came to the Graduate Center not really, and I've mentioned this before, it's kind of embarrassing to mention on the podcast, but I didn't realize that CUNY had such a kind of like working class kind of orientation when I came here. I came here because it was a public school. I could afford it. There were, there's a good history department, but I didn't realize that it has this kind of left-wing tradition. Were you aware of that tradition? Was it kind of one of the reasons you wanted to go to CUNY?
That is not one of the things that drew me to CUNY.
No?
No. It was really the place that showed the most interest in me.
Yeah.
Of the places where I was accepted and where I felt like I fit in.
Yeah, it's like the only place I got in, I think. So there's that element as well.
I didn't have to pay money to go.
It wasn't as planned out as that. So I one of the things that I've always known about you is that you're from California, right?
Yeah.
Where were you born?
I spent 18 years there. I was born in Orange County, California.
What part of
Anaheim.
Orange County?
I was born
Anaheim.
in Memorial.
Near Disneyland.
December 15th, 1971. Just near Disneyland. That's right.
And so, okay, so you're talking about the late 70s and 80s of you coming of age in Orange County.
Yeah.
I'm from Ventura, California, which is north of Orange County. Orange County always existed to us as the place where Disneyland was, the place that's a little further than LA, and the place where, the only things I knew about it were that it was a kind of place of rolling suburbs. I knew it had a high Asian population because my dad always kind of told me about the story of like refugees from Southeast Asia and that whole story. Yeah. What was your experience of Orange County? I know that's a big question.
Yeah,
but
it's a big question. I feel like my experience was an experience of never really feeling like I belonged there. I feel like the minute I was born, I was ready to get the hell out of Orange County. And I think maybe a lot of people who grew up there, certainly a lot of people I spent time with, seemed to feel the same way.
Yeah, like your peer group we're not fans of Orange County?
No.
You were like alienated.
Pretty much, yes. Me more than my friends, I think, even more. Orange County is a strange place. I think I told you this before, when we were thinking about doing this talk, that growing up in Orange County is maybe one of the most ordinary experiences someone can have, but it's also one of the strangest and bizarre.
Well, I mean, that describes the suburbs in a lot of ways, right? It feels like, and a previous guest that I was talking to on this podcast was talking about the suburbs as a place that it was kind of far from the realities of urban life, and as a result, that might explain part of why it develops this kind of conservative culture where people feel like life is easy. I know a young person in the suburbs who I won't name who recently said to me, he's 18 years old, making money is easy. I don't know why people can't just make money. And it just seems like there's a break from reality in places like that, or at least I don't know. It's almost like a closed-off utopia that then applies that ideology to the rest of the country without realizing what the rest of the country is going through.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Orange County is definitely a very conservative place, and I think those values of I got mine, what's wrong with you, are very common. At the same time, though, what's really interesting to remember about Orange County is that it is an extraordinarily diverse place, actually.
Yeah. It's not just a place that's all white people.
No, not just. Yeah, it's diverse both ethnically as well as economically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was raised in a very sort of working class family. We didn't have a lot of money.
Did you feel
that was a common experience?
Were you aware of that? Were you aware of that you were living in a place that was known for its wealth? I mean, I know that there's a show called The OC now, or there was a show called The OC that's kind of like, presenting, I imagine, some stereotype of what this place is. And yet, did you know, like, were you aware of class? At what point were you aware?
Arrested Development does a wonderful job of satirizing that.
Right.
I was not aware, really, of any class differences at all in any political sense. Growing up, it was more emotional or psychological responses to differences, maybe in levels of privilege that I sort of instinctively or intuitively felt, but
Right.
never was able to articulate in any political terms. I mean, the word class just wasn't something that I was even aware existed.
Well, I think that's a theme that comes up on this show a lot is that we kind of need, as Americans, we often need permission to talk about class. It's not something that people think that is appropriate to bring up. Whereas, in other parts of the world, class is the discussion. But in America, we're unique in that we don't want to feel that class is rigid. So we feel like, well, if you don't like your class, you can just move out of it somehow. A class as a determinant of American experience is something that people don't want to come to terms with. It feels like. It seems like Orange County might be particularly a place where class isn't discussed. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, I think you're right. I think I think people maybe growing up in the New York metro area were probably much more conscious of class. Orange County, there was a sense, some people had more money than you, and you might resent that.
Mm-hmm.
You might not like that. You might not like them because they're rich kids.
Yeah.
But the idea that somehow you were from a particular class just wasn't really, like I said, it wasn't really on the radar.
So what about culture? Is that what are the roots of your alienation in Orange County? Is it something that happens in middle school and high school? Are you a punk? Because you were talking about coming of age in the late 70s and early 80s. The culture that I remember was even in the suburbs, we had a little coffee shop in Ventura that was where all the goth kids hung out, all the kids that were dressed up like The Cure. And I was like too young for that stuff. And so I was very susceptible to my parents telling me that they were zombies and ghouls and like really scary people and I should stay away. And that coffee shop was called the Daily Grind. It was the place where the counterculture, pretty much the only place where the counterculture might hang out in my town. It's a Starbucks now, and people are in suits,
Of course,
wearing working on laptops, and that's the difference. Do you feel like there was like some sort of counterculture available to you in Orange County?
There was, and I think I dabbled and participated in a lot of different ones.
Yeah, I think we all do. Like in high school, and when you're young, you feel like you can try on those hats.
Yeah, exactly.
It's different now. I don't put on the Cure makeup and
No.
and try that out for the day.
No, God, I swear I can't even listen to The Cure anymore, except maybe their first album.
Was that your scene?
A little bit, sure. I
Yeah.
was really into in my later teen years. I was really into, I guess, what we now call post-punk.
Yeah, yeah.
And it did. I guess I identified with it on a certain level, but for me, it was really about the music. The Smiths were super important to me when I was, 16, 17. And, of course, The Cure and Depeche Mode. And then, I discovered Bauhaus, and they were great. I never put on makeup. I never dyed my hair black or anything. But I did wear black clothing a lot.
So was that your consciousness in high school? Was that, if we talk about the typical kind of high school characters, jocks and nerds and goths, where would you put yourself in high school? Were you a good student?
I was a terrible student.
Yeah.
And I was a bad kid. I think I think the place that I existed in the high school strata was, the bad kids. And there was a group of us, about 5 or 6, and most of my friends were kind of jockey.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
But we loved, post-punk music, and we loved to drink, and we loved to do drugs, and get into trouble. And chase girls.
Yeah, that sounds like high school.
Right.
At what point does politics enter into this world for you at all? Are you just
it's
kind
not
of
there,
like?
Man. It's really not. There's no political. At least for me and my friends, there's no political awareness at all until much later in my life.
So do you? I mean, obviously, you remember Ronald Reagan being president.
Of course.
And I feel like maybe you had the same attitude towards it I did. It was kind of like a benign. I mean, I really had no real attitude towards Reagan beyond that he was the old man at the top of the country. Didn't realize, like, now that Reagan is still a figure that I think about politically in terms of changing the direction of the country. In other words, I didn't realize how momentous things were, and maybe I shouldn't because I was like a teenager when they were happening. So when you're graduating high school, how'd you decide what to study in college and where to go? Where did you want to leave Orange County immediately as soon as you graduated? 'Cause it sounds like you left at 18. Yeah,
I did. I left when I was 18 for a little while. I hitchhiked around the Southwest, and then I came back for about another year or two, and then I left permanently.
That's a world that it seems like can barely exist anymore. Hitchhiking around the Southwest.
Yeah, nobody does it anymore.
Or hitchhiking at all.
And riding freights too, for a little while.
What motivated you to do that? Is this like a romantic like beat literature thing?
Very much so, but it wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't the beats. It was actually Walt Whitman.
He's a beat in a way.
I had been reading Leaves of Grass.
Yeah,
and I had lost my job and picked up my last check, and so I said, "Fuck it, man, I'm leaving."
This would have been like 1989 or 1990, something like that.
Yeah, Song of the Open Road.
Yeah,
and I said, "That's it, I'm leaving," and I bought a one-way ticket to Las Vegas, and then I traveled around the Southwest for about 3 or 4 months before I finally ran out of money and came back home, and just
you never thought about like
got tired of sleeping outside.
Yeah, and
sleeping in shelters.
There's that idea of like I don't know, that idea of like, when we run out of money, we'll just stop and wash dishes somewhere. I had that idea too. It was after college for me instead of high school, but it was like, if we run out of money, we'll just ask someone to give us a quick job. And it feels like now you would have to go into a Subway, talk to a manager, show 3 forms of ID, go through this corporate process to get a job. In other words, it just doesn't seem like that world exists in the way that it did for people even just 20 years ago in the United States. When you drive across the country now, you see basically the same businesses that you see in New York City. You see Dunkin' Donuts and Costco and Applebee's and that kind of stuff. And they're not hiring the beat guy from that's just passing through town. All right, so you get back from your sojourn of hitchhiking, and you decide what, to put your life back together and go to college?
No.
No,
I think I wanted to be a poet then.
I
was writing a lot of poetry at that time and reading poetry in the local coffee scene, the local coffee house scene in Orange County, which was probably not too different from the daily grind in Ventura.
Trench coats?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, trench coats were big back then. It sounds like you had a kind
plaid.
Of you had a romantic kind of view of things at this time in your life.
Very much.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
And you're
listening to the Smiths will do that to you.
Yeah, and being into literature like you are,
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely,
yeah. Was that always a love for you, reading the great works?
It was. Reading and writing. Look, I was a single child of a single mother, a latchkey kid. I spent a lot of time alone, and books were a source of comfort and companionship for me. So they became really meaningful and important to me.
And they kind of tell you who you are after a while, in a sense.
Well,
they help you figure that out.
They shape you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think they just help you. They also shape you in many ways.
So, at what point do you decide to follow your
I left again.
Your love
so
of
after
literature.
a couple of years, I broke up with a woman I had been living with, whom I loved very much. My first, very serious girlfriend. And I didn't know what to do with myself, and I hated Orange County, and the culture. And so I wanted to go somewhere else. So I moved to Denver. I lived in Denver for 2 years.
What drew you to Denver?
Denver, the great stopping point, for the beats.
We were
talking about the beats a little bit earlier.
I think about Denver and Boulder, Colorado, a lot as places that are important culturally for the West.
Absolutely.
So did you go to Denver out of some kind of
again? It was a
romance.
Yes, of course. It was an impulsive move, and I think I had. I had maybe $300 or $400 with me, and I just left. And did the sort of that sort of beat lifestyle of just playing it by ear. And maybe like you said, it was a different time, but it worked.
Yeah,
and it always worked for me. Maybe I'm lucky. Maybe I've got a guardian angel or something, or I have a charmed life. But there's just so many good people out there that are and interesting people who are willing to help someone who they think is interesting.
So that
And so, I got put up on couches and floors the very first night I was there with strangers. People
That's
I didn't
awesome.
even know. They're like, yeah, just crash on my couch, man.
And you rode that luck for a couple years in Denver?
Pretty much.
How'd you like Denver?
I loved it. Denver's an amazing city.
Yeah,
It really is.
I feel like it is too. I've not spent much time in Denver. I have a few friends that have lived there over the years, and it seems like a place that
It's small.
yeah, has the best of all worlds in a sense.
Yeah. It's sort of, I've never been to Portland, but it's sort of what I think, Portland's like.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Portland as kind of a place that is somehow a major city, but it feels like a very outdoor kind of little outpost of the West.
Yeah. And I did a lot of that same poetry scene, that same literary
when you say
romance,
poetry scene, how were you? Were you writing poetry? Were you going to poetry readings?
Yeah,
And
writing and going to poetry readings. There was a great little coffee house called Paris on the Platte, where the Platte River runs through Denver.
It's a Starbucks now, I guarantee.
Yeah, no doubt, unfortunately.
So it sounds like this time is a time that you still are a little nostalgic about. That this was a positive time in your life, a rich cultural time.
Yeah, in many ways, my life began when I was 18. Everything before that was a big blur.
Yeah.
Of drugs and just.
And angst and growing up. Yeah. So it sounds like you like a lot of us, you start to put yourself together after you leave home and start to create an identity for yourself. And so you're now, it sounds like in Denver you're about like 20, 21, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm those are the years I'm there. I turned 21 there. Yeah.
And where do you go from Denver?
I fell in love with another woman who was
as the poet does.
Who was a student at Hampshire College, and I loved her very much, and did not want to be away from her because we had met on her when she had visited for Christmas, and then she came back for the summer, and we were together in the summer, and then she was going back to Hampshire, so I decided I was going to go out and be with her. So I moved out to New England, the Hampshire Valley, it's called.
Yeah.
And I lived in a little town there that many people are familiar with called Northampton.
What's it like
Massachusetts. Northampton is another one of these blessed little places like Denver or Portland. It's just it's an oasis. It's a cultural and political oasis.
It's these hidden towns and cities that don't really fall under the mainstream radar. That are fascinating to me. There are a lot of them in New England. It seems like, and just dotting the landscape. These little Stephen King towns that have a sense of community that I feel like is missing in a lot of places in America. Okay, so you now you're on the East Coast. You've come to where you are now.
I had arrived. When I left when I was 18 to hitchhike around the Southwest. The plan was really to get to New York.
What about
in as roundabout a way as I could, as I could, and of course I never made it that far. I made it to Dallas, and Dallas in the '90s was such an ugly place, mean, vicious.
I feel like Dallas is still like that in a certain respect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that broke me. I had to leave. They charged people to stay in the shelter there.
Oh, that's interesting. You charge people to stay in like a homeless shelter,
right?
Hope they have good rates. Jesus. So, what drew you to New York City? Because I feel like the literary aspect of it, but what is it that made you want to be here? Because I ended up here too from California, and right. I don't know. When I look back on it, I feel like it was almost like inevitable that I would end up here.
I feel that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often joke that I was really born a blue blood. New England, I also felt very comfortable there, like I belonged, and I feel that way in New York as well. I don't know. Maybe there's certain personalities are not suited for California. Perhaps I don't know.
It's something that I think about a lot as we consider moving back to California. Sometimes I think, God, why am I not there? Why did I leave? Why did I come to this cold, gray city where everyone's so mean and everything's so expensive?
Right.
But then when I'm in California, I just want to be back in New York. It's a weird phenomenon. There's a kind of like cultural magnetism to the place, even as it turns into. There was an article in the Times you may have seen the other day that was about how New York can consider itself a literary city anymore when bookshops have closed, and to the point where if you live in New York, it's getting sad visually just watching this happen, because some major institutions are just kind of going away, not only bookstores but record stores and everything else. And we're losing, an aspect of culture that I think drew a lot of people here in the first place, and I include myself. I think that I probably still would have moved here. I don't think New York's ruined in a certain sense, but at the same time, to see some of these bookstores close and turn into TD Banks is incredibly depressing. Because I left that kind of that suburban landscape. I specifically remember when I was working at a corporate restaurant that'll go unnamed, that was in a parking lot of a Circuit City in Oxnard, in Oxnard, California, and I was standing outside smoking a cigarette on my break, and I realized that I was standing on a concrete barrier that had a fake palm tree stuck in it, and I was just like, it felt like a very Vonnegut kind of moment, like what am I in? What kind of landscape am I in that everything is so incredibly artificial? Get me to some sort of authenticity. And New York, even in just physically, like the architecture of the place looks authentic. You know what I mean? It does not look like it doesn't look like the suburbs. It doesn't look like it was just popped out of a box in a factory somewhere and put together, like these shopping centers that I kind of navigated as a child. That's why, I don't know if you saw this picture of the Mars Bar. Do you remember Mars Bar in East Village? It was like
oh yeah, of course,
really crusty scumbag kind of rocker
worst
bar.
Bathrooms in the Village.
Horrible. First time I went in there was like one of my first sojourns into the East Village, and I went in there maybe 3 a.m, and all the chairs were thrown on the floor because there had just been a fight, and people were smoking cigarettes when they weren't supposed to, and I just felt like, this is the New York I was looking for, where the losers are. They tore that place down and replaced it with a TD Bank, and the picture of the before and after, what it looks like, is just dramatic. I mean, because they took something that looked unique and they turned that corner into a corner that could be on any block anywhere in America, and it's kind of sad to see that. So, all right, so
yeah, I mean, look, I think New York has outlived its cultural significance, really. I think it had its moment, and then I think it jumped the shark with, the whole Sex and the City sort of era.
I think Giuliani, Bloomberg, 9/11, those three elements kind of
New York's done.
Rearranged it.
Yeah. And frankly, I don't even want to live here anymore.
Yeah, you're in your bitter mode about New York.
Absolutely. I'm here, and it has other benefits besides being a cultural capital.
Yeah.
Jobs, for instance, is a nice thing to have.
Jobs, riding the subway instead of having a car.
Transportation, exactly. But it's just becoming more and more, like you said. I mean, I think you captured it pretty well. It's just becoming it's losing its authenticity and becoming like everything else.
It's kind of
but maybe that is authentic.
Yeah, that's the authenticity of our age is ATMs and yogurt shops.
Maybe all of this this high culture is just a farce.
I don't know. Well, I feel like
veneer.
I heard this point made the other day that the internet kind of changed this in a sense. Is that there used to be for me to find cool people and find a scene, I felt like you had to go to somewhere. Where I feel like the generation that's behind us on the internet is finding a counterculture, in the ether in a sense, and people in a sense that's good because a guy or a girl in Nebraska can find a scene and kind of develop his own kind of attitudes and find people that are like-minded, etc., that wouldn't be able to before. But that's bad for New York, because New York's no longer a place people need to go to find those things, if that makes sense.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it used to be if you wanted to be a writer or you wanted to be involved, you had to be in New York or maybe Chicago or Los Angeles.
When did you first come to New York?
Well, I came here for graduate school.
I
had been to New York many times before. I had visited several times. You talk about the Mars Bar. My first impression of New York must have been 1994, I believe.
That's a different New York even than the one I saw in 2003. So. Yeah, for sure.
And my dear beloved friend Charles Hughes, who was a punk, he still is a punk his whole life. He lives in London now, but had been, he was living on St. Mark's in a tiny little one-room apartment there. One of those, they was really a flop house mostly. And I had come to visit him, and I walked down St. Mark's, and I swear to God, the streets were filled with punks.
Yeah.
On their hands and knees, like riding each other like horses, laughing. No cars going by.
Yeah.
People. It was just, and I thought, just like you said with Mars Bar, I thought, I have arrived. Like, this is what I've been looking for.
And not that, and I mean, what's interesting about that is for me to like look at Mars Bar, you to see the guys, on their hands and knees, acting like, complete like chaotic jackasses on the streets in East Village. You didn't want to necessarily be that, right? You don't want to necessarily be the guys, riding on each other's backs, drunk in the East Village. And yet there was a romance attached to that image.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah,
It was a certain amount of rebellion, I think.
Mm-hmm. And just it's comforting knowing that exists, I think. Knowing that there are a lot of people that are not with the program.
Right.
Right. And in the suburbs, it feels like everybody's with the program. You like that whole like Stepford idea, like you're one of them. When you see that in the suburbs. For me, it was I was in Ventura when 9/11 happened, and the Support Our Troops bumper stickers and the Never Forget bumper stickers on the SUVs, there was something about that was a tipping point for me, like just watching all these privileged people that had no idea about anything in the world smacking these jingoistic bumper stickers onto their $50,000 vehicles made me feel really alone. It made me feel like I'm living in an environment where I might be the only person that sees the bullshit, and I don't want to like think it's like I have some special knowledge or anything. I just felt completely disgusted with the kind of blind patriotism that came out of that era, and I attached it to the suburbs because I felt like these are the people that are supposed to be the mainstream Americans, and they're taking their orders right from the television, and it was scary to watch. I think it was the first time that I was like, it made it more real than ever before, if that makes sense. So you see that in New York in '94. You see these punks running around, and it makes you want to be there. And did you feel like you had to like find an excuse to come to New York? I felt like I needed to go to graduate school to like justify just showing up.
Perhaps, yeah. Perhaps I was doing the same thing. When I was accepted to the Graduate Center, I was very happy at the idea of going to New York.
We skipped over your undergrad experience. Where did you go to college?
I went to UMass Amherst.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot to finish that story. So I wind up in Northampton, Massachusetts, and to be with this woman whom I feel a deep sense of competition with and a certain amount of resentment. She's very middle class. She's going to Hampshire College. And I think to myself, well, if she can do it, why can't I? So I went back to school, and I went to Holyoke Community College because I had to go to community college because I didn't have a high school degree. I had a GED that I had gotten when I was 19. I dropped out of high school pretty much in the 8th grade, to be honest, is when I stopped going.
You're kind of a classic underachiever in a sense.
Yeah.
You could have been, an honor student. It seems like you have the skills and the intelligence to be that, but it sounds like you just didn't have the motivation I sound like a dad. Like you don't have the motivation or the maturity to do this, but it sounds like you just didn't give a fuck, right? For a while when you were young.
Yeah, motivation, maturity were definitely part of it. I was not ready to go to school when I was 18.
Yeah,
absolutely not. I don't know how these people do it. I don't know how my students do it.
Well, a lot of them don't make it.
Yeah, that's true.
Or they fail for a while and they learn. So what was it that you studied as an undergrad?
English.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty clear to me from the minute I started going to school that would be my major. I would study literature, and I would be a poet, or I'd be a professor.
And you share that with the world. So that I mean, it seems like
I didn't want to do anything else. I mean, talk about a lack of ambition. I mean, everything else to me was just, first of all, was meaningless and a waste of time.
Well, it sounds like you found going to school for something you're passionate about, rather than you didn't say like I'm going to go get a degree in public affairs, or I'm going to go get an accounting degree, something technical or anything else. You felt like you wanted to study your passion and share your passion, and I feel like those
part of it.
Those are the people that are set up for a lot of pain in the realm of academia, because in a way, I mean, we'll get to graduate school, but I feel like a lot of graduate students and a lot of people who follow their lives into academia fool themselves into thinking that they're going to escape a lot of the corporate bullshit that you might see, the politics, the ugly budget shit, everything that comes with all the other jobs. I feel like, especially people that are maybe humanities majors, are like, I'm gonna pursue the life of the mind. I'm gonna pursue a kind of romantic vision of sharing this knowledge with the young minds. Did you find that to be true for yourself? Were you trying to did you have a romantic vision of what you're doing, and was there ever a moment where you kind of were disillusioned by the idea of this is just a job in some respects?
Well, that has certainly happened.
Mm-hmm.
It took a long time for me. Perhaps I'm naive or overly romantic, but yeah, it took me until really late into my graduate career before those kinds of disillusionment started to really sink in.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because you were the editor of the GC, the Graduate Center Advocate, which during your tenure, I haven't read the paper in a little while, but during your tenure, the Advocate, I would say, was part of a process of radicalization in some sense for me. Although I was definitely like kind of a left-wing kind of thinker when I came to the Graduate Center. The Advocate kind of brought those issues to my experience as a graduate student, and realizing a lot of things about the school that I was employed for or employed by, and not only that, but just the kind of overall issues with academia. What was it like, and why'd you decide to become the editor of the school paper, or was it just something that you did for the job? Because I feel like you had a mission when you were the editor.
Yeah, I came in with a mission.
Yeah.
The paper was sort of floundering, really. 8, 10-page, 12-page broadsheets. It was full of errors and sort of stories that were either conspiracy theories or stories about the bathrooms being dirty in the
that's a problem. That is a problem.
I came in very much with a mission to make it a more serious publication, and to also make it a publication that could address culture,
mm-hmm.
as well as politics, and could address national politics and international politics, as well as local CUNY politics. So both of those were really important to me, and I really wanted to make it a vehicle for change within the City University of New York community. I mean, I always thought of the Advocate as a City University of New York newspaper, not a Graduate Center newspaper, and our emphasis was on all of the campuses and the problems that the university faced, and the just myriad struggles going on all the time.
Yeah, and let's talk about a few of those struggles, because for me, and I think I know for you as well, working at and becoming a graduate student at the CUNY Graduate Center was a process of discovering what an adjunct was. I had no idea what an adjunct professor did. I know that there's starting to be a little bit more of a wider consciousness of that now. Still not enough consciousness. I think if more Americans understood what's happening in higher education, they would be a little more upset and a little more unwilling to spend tens of thousands of dollars sending their children to colleges like this. But when was it that you discovered what an adjunct was, and what a miserable situation adjunct professors are in?
Yeah, I guess it was when I became an adjunct is when I discovered what an adjunct was. And it's so funny because, I criticize my students for I don't criticize them, but in my mind,
you lament.
Exactly.
Right.
That they don't seem to understand that so many of their instructors are adjuncts, and yet here I was at UMass Amherst, although I think I was lucky because, UMass Amherst does not use that many adjuncts, but I definitely had grad student teachers there.
I wonder if that's changed since you've been there.
I think they still don't use very many adjuncts.
That's good.
Massachusetts is a good place.
I wish there were more schools like that.
I know. But
So yeah, for people that
no,
don't
I
know,
had adjuncts.
Yeah.
Right, and I think I had adjuncts at Holyoke too, and it never occurred to me to think of them as any different from a professor. And by the way, for me, I looked at professors as just nothing. No one could be better than a professor.
Yeah.
No one deserved more respect than that person.
Right. No, I agree with you. I still feel that way.
Yeah.
I went to UCSB, and while I was there were tremendous labor fights between contingent labor. They didn't call them. They were graduate students, but they weren't adjuncts. They were just like TAs. They were just assistants. And the model that the UC system uses is kind of weird. They have like 500-person lectures with the star professors, and then all those 500 kids are then divided into little sections taught by graduate students. And I understood then, because there were strikes going on, and I was reading the signs, that those graduate students were not happy. But as a student, I didn't really felt like I understood it. So becoming an adjunct, can you just kind of explain what an adjunct is for those that don't know what an adjunct is and why adjuncts are in this situation?
Sure. The City University of New York and many universities call them adjunct lecturers is the standard term. I prefer to call them contingent faculty. Mm-hmm. For all kinds of reasons, because
it's like the difference between illegal aliens and undocumented workers, in a sense.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, adjunct suggests something that is not central or vital or necessary.
Yeah,
and that's complete bullshit, because adjuncts are teaching about 70% of the classes at CUNY,
which is tremendous. What James is suggesting here is that 70% of classes at CUNY are being taught by people that are being paid well below what they should be being paid for what they're doing, right. And just recently getting health benefits. Is that right?
They've not always, but they've had access to health benefits for several years now, I believe. Yeah, if you're teaching a certain minimum number of courses. But yeah, anyways, so an adjunct is someone who frequently teaches full time. So that the other problem is they're frequently called part timers, but that's also fallacious, because they generally teach. If they're living exclusively off of teaching, they'll teach 4 classes.
And that's not. I mean,
and that's a full time. That's definitely a full time.
4 classes adjuncting at CUNY is a full time schedule, but not really much money. And when I say not much money, I'm saying
the average is $3,000 a class for those.
Right. Over the course of almost about 4 months. Right. So right. I mean, the way it works. So
we're looking at $24,000 a year.
Yeah. So $24,000 a year in New York City is not a life. For any of you that know what it's like to live here, $24,000 isn't going to get you very far. I feel like that you need that for about 3 months in New York City, depending on your lifestyle, obviously. But the adjunct situation is creating an underclass of academics. Essentially, we have. I feel like when I see graduate students just now, I haven't been in the graduate center for a while, but I just went up to the cafeteria and it was packed full of graduate students, and I wanted to say to them, like, what are your worries? Like what's it like for you? Because I'm a couple years out of the program, and I don't have a full-time job, and I don't know where we're going with this. I don't know if I'm still, in other words, I'm still like kind of seeing if the wager of getting a PhD is going to pay off, at least in academia. And that's I think a scary thing for a lot of people to come to terms with. I just wonder, if people are just not going to go to graduate school anymore, if they're aware of what is at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah, look though, people have known about the situation for a very long time, and yet they keep going to graduate school.
Yeah, I mean there is that issue.
There's something that's not. People just aren't getting, or they're willing to take that bet, and that's really what it is. It really is a wager.
Well, I think that it's a way for people to survive too. I mean, I've talked to students that are going to graduate school that are undergrads that are like, well, I'm going to go to graduate school because I can't find a job and I can get student loans, and it's like this weird kind of like welfare state for 20-year for people that are out of undergrad and have some skill and are able to go into some sort of graduate program. They can get access to federal funds.
Yeah,
and that's loan. I'm talking about loans.
That they're then absolutely forced to pay back. They can never file bankruptcy on those loans.
Yeah,
it's a kind of
believe me, James. I know that
it is public assistance.
Yeah.
But the funny part about that though is that you're being exploited in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
you don't figure that out until maybe your second or third year. You begin to realize how little you're being paid for the labor that you're providing.
Was that shocking to you? Was it? I mean, I felt like I didn't know anything of how this was going to go when I applied to graduate school. I thought, I mean, I applied to CUNY. I got accepted. I came in I guess the fall of 2004, and they basically told me, look, you're going to go to Baruch College and you're going to teach classes there. And I was so excited. I thought this is so cool, and they're going to pay me. And it was a slow process. You don't feel like you're being exploited, particularly because I had just a year earlier been standing in the Circuit City parking lot smoking a cigarette. I was like, they're going to send me to school. I'm going to do something meaningful. Instead of waiting tables and slinging beer to morons, I'm going to be talking to undergrads about American history and things that matter. And so, in other words, like my romanticization of academia was like a weakness, that could be exploited. I feel like that's what's kind of sad about this process is that
I've written about this. The Guardian article I wrote about adjuncts and whether or not adjuncts are I didn't choose that headline, by the way, whether or not adjuncts are the new fast food workers of academia.
It's a good clickbait headline,
exactly.
though, and that's a fantastic article.
But, I wrote about the fact that one of the things about adjuncting that is so insidious is that it does precisely take advantage of the better angels of our nature.
Mm-hmm.
That is that desire to want to do something valuable, meaningful, to want to share important ideas with students, to want to, rather than like you said, slinging beer. Or
even working in the private sector. Do you ever imagine a life or a career outside of academia anymore? Do you still? It sounds like
I never did. I was one of those people, and I still am one of those people who look at the alt-ac sort of trend. The alternatives to academia trend as just something I could absolutely never consider.
Yeah, alt-ac is this buzzword that's going around right now. It's like, you're never going to find a tenure track job. If you look at it, if you look at the numbers, and I mean, I'm speaking from being a person that studies American history. If I look at the numbers of job openings along with the amount of PhDs out there, how many people are applying to these jobs, it's hard not to be cynical. And so you get to a point where you think, well, I better start considering things beyond that tenured track position. I better start considering what we call the alt-ac career, the alternative academic, which, I don't even know. There are people that know more about it than I do that are imagining kind of different sectors that people can go into. For historians, there's like public history and museums, things like that. That's not too bad. But then there's also I don't know if you've ever looked into like actually going and working for the enemy. And when I say the enemy, I mean private for-profit schools.
Helping to design MOOCs or something.
That's unbelievable. I had a moment where I was like, fuck it. I might as well understand what the offer is. You know what I mean? So I looked at getting a job at University of Phoenix, which is
right.
a online university. I thought maybe I could design curriculum. Maybe they'll pay me really well. No. Like, I don't know if you ever looked. It's bad. And what they describe as the experience of being a teacher there is basically they give you packets that you teach by these packets, and we're observed as professors. We're observed once a semester. Usually another professor will come in and give us a little kind of rundown of what's working, what's not. But their observation process is so insane. I mean, they basically have managers that come in and make sure that you are teaching the material the way it's supposed to. I shut that site down so quickly, closed that browser tab because it was just like an instant kind of recognition that, oh, it's as bad as I would imagine it is. It's like working at the McDonald's of college. Did you ever consider going to any of those places?
No.
I mean, I say that because you were a subject of a Times piece not
right.
too long ago that did kind of romanticize your life,
yeah.
and was about kind of like isn't it amazing that he still keeps plugging even though he's not going anywhere? In terms of full-time jobs, and he's representative of this kind of class of PhDs that have nowhere to go. Why couldn't you consider an all-tac career? What was that for you?
And I think a lot of PhDs probably feel the same way. I mean, sure, give me another. And I think she quoted me. I think the last quote in that article was, well, come talk to me in 5 years and see where I am, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if I had had to suffer as an adjunct for another 5 years, I would have chosen to do something else.
Right.
But like so many PhDs, I invested 12 years into this PhD. And the idea that I would then turn around and do something that I could have done with a bachelor's degree was just absolutely reprehensible to me. And I, frankly, and you want to know the truth, after 12 years, I'm not really qualified to do anything else.
That's another thing I've realized. Seriously.
I can teach pretty well, and that's about it.
Right. Yeah. I realized that is like, you talk about like, well, I could go work in a nonprofit sector. So you start imagining that. I'm like, I don't have skills for that.
No.
I have no reason to apply for jobs like that. There are people that deserve those jobs more than I do. Which is a horrifying kind of reality. Is I've spent 12 years, becoming skilled at a very particular thing that the society. During those same 12 years, the society is deciding they don't need that anymore.
Right. My only other skill set was as an editor and a writer and a sort of pseudo-journalist. I'm not really a journalist. I'm not trained. But
journalism and publishing is another industry that
was another industry that's dying. And so, if someone had come to me after I had finished The Advocate, if the Jacobin had come to me and said, hi, we'd like you to be an associate editor or something, I would have been thrilled to do that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
If the New York Review of Books wanted me to be an assistant editor, assistant to the assistant editor or something, I would have been thrilled to do that. But those jobs are few and far between now. Journalism is just a dying industry.
Yeah, I mean, as we're sitting here doing a podcast and trying, it's changing. Let's put it that way.
It's become this entrepreneurial thing now.
Yeah.
And by the way, this entrepreneurial sort of way of being now is everyone is just trying to sell themselves as a product.
Right.
And that, to me, is perhaps the most nightmarish position to be in, is to have to sell myself as a product. I mean, call me a socialist, call me a romantic, call me a naive, but
I'll call you all those things.
We need more public jobs, that are guaranteed jobs that people, unless someone is really doing their job poorly, they don't get fired. They get regular raises. They remain at their job. They become better at it. They advance, and they get pensions, and they get health care. But there's this idea now that no one keeps a job for more than a couple years without going out and
we're all freelancers essentially. Yeah, I know. It's disturbing, and I feel like one of the things that has always intrigued me about you, James, is that you're not a defeatist. Would you classify yourself as an activist? You're very much kind of engaged in changing the world in some respects. You haven't just said, fuck it, it's all going to hell. I mean, believe me, I know people here at the Graduate Center that are just very, very cynical, almost nihilistic about what's happening. It seems like you're not like that. It seems like you're engaged in the problem.
I'm not a nihilist.
No.
So I am a romantic, and I am a naive.
Yeah, it sounds like that kind of...
But I wouldn't call myself an activist either, because I'm just not as active as real activists. I'd like.
Do you feel guilty about not being as active?
I do feel guilty, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, like we all should.
Well, that's the thing is like there is a movement. Even in our union, the PSC CUNY union, they do actions, and that was another thing that I felt like you're kind of fighting against a demoralization that happens among graduate students, that they just feel like nothing's going to change, and I'm just not going to, engage in the issue in any way. And what we've seen is that the administration loves that attitude because it's just been stepped down from there. How do you feel about this, about academia? And do you have hope that it can turn around? There is a consciousness happening, and you're part of that. That the New York Times article, I think, was a pretty extraordinary thing in that we have coverage for the idea of adjuncts, and they're starting to spread this kind of awareness of that. Diane Ravitch, you know who that is, right?
course.
You know, she's a big figure in education right now, and that she was on Bill Moyers just last weekend, and the things she was saying were incredibly disturbing about like the future of American communities because public education is being just gutted right now. And I feel like that's always been in the background of our lives since we were kids, that education was becoming something else. But it's definitely accelerated lately, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's something that's been going on since, I guess, the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Especially California, got hit really hard, especially after the recession. Their tuition rates just went up. I think something like
for the UCs,
150 or 200%.
Yeah, something ridiculous.
So, and then what was it? Was it Prop 19? What was the proposition that put the cap on property taxes in California that led to the sort of slow decline of what was the world's greatest university system?
That process started in the 80s. It's funny you mentioned that because
you and I lived through that, and
yeah,
by the
didn't
time
really
we would
realize
have been
it.
ready to go to the UCs, they were different places.
I think people in my neighborhood were part of advocating for it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's amazing because in the suburbs you get this hostility towards the public, towards public institutions, and I grew up in. The public schools were amazing where I came from. I think Prop 13 is what you're talking about.
Yes,
that started. I mean, that's the Proposition 13 is part of the history of growing conservatism in America. And Orange County was kind of ground zero for a grassroots organization. We talked about. I talked about this with Connor on the previous show. That the suburbs of Orange County were places where you had large groups of Republicans who were holding, kind of tea parties at their house and promoting Republican policies, and it became a move towards privatization that we're now seeing embedded in every sector of our society, and it's creating a nightmare.
Yeah. What was the question about the university that you had asked that led to the discussion about Prop 13?
I feel like I wanted you to give your kind of prophecy on where we're going. It feels like I brought up the Ravitch thing because she said that we're not going to have public education in this country anymore. Do you think that's true, or do you think there will be a turnaround?
Wow, part of me wants to think that we've reached the nadir of this sort of drive for privatization. Perhaps we've got a ways to go.
Yeah.
Perhaps we've got another 5 or 10 years. And a lot of damage can be done during that time. But I think at a certain point, things are going to have to turn around and go the other direction. It's just people can't afford to pay to send their kids to private schools. There's people don't have money to do that.
Yeah, and I mean we've and the result
no
is
one's going to go to college anymore either if tuition remains where it is, and interest rates on student loans, which are outrageous actually.
And it seems like the logical result of all these policies is just the further kind of entrenchment of this massive underclass in the United States that is unable to really access any of the levers of economic power or political power or social power. There is like this kind of moment for schools in New York where Bill de Blasio recently, has made a lot of waves standing up or not standing up to the idea of charter schools.
The Chicago teachers strike.
Yeah, what do you know about the Chicago?
That was not
about what's going on in Chicago.
It was not really about money. It was a lot about the system and tests and privatization and the way that teachers are trained and treated. And that's important, that kind of pushing back. And, unions have historically been able to lead battles that aren't just about wages and benefits, but are also about the nature of the work, And the Chicago teacher strike was really about pushing back against that privatization. And that's it's a good sign.
Yeah,
and I think it's going to continue to happen.
I think it has to. Whether
or not it's going to be successful, I don't know.
Well, it's sad in the sense that like we've talked about, you're taking a class of people who for whatever reason became teachers. I feel like there aren't a lot of incentives to become teachers anymore. In other words, becoming a teacher was always seen in American life as a bit of a sacrifice in terms of money, but something that people did because they believed in the work, something that they did because they had a kind of romantic notion about it. When you have all of that gone away, right? When you can't even teach for the joy of teaching anymore because you have to just give a test, I feel like, and this is what Diane Ravitch said the other day on Moyers, who would become a teacher anymore? It's cut off that possibility, and it's kind of strange to be living this way.
It's an interesting point. It's as if the conservatives and the small government types have sort of shot themselves in the foot with this, over bureaucratization of teaching, because a lot of teachers will take less money.
Yeah.
They really will. And
yeah.
just for the reasons that you said, is because people don't become teachers because they want to make a lot of money.
No, I became a teacher because and I feel like you probably are coming from the same place. I honestly, and this sounds like I think a lot of people would say, lose the kind of condescending attitude towards work. But I felt like there was nothing else I could do. Yeah. Like that teaching was the only thing I can imagine that gave meaning to my work. Working just for money is what teaching will become. And if the money's not good, and all you're doing is going in there to fill in some bubbles and teach your students how to fill in bubbles. What you've created is nobody's going to want to teach anymore.
Right.
And I know teaching is not the only industry that's experiencing this. But it's disturbing to us, I think, because we understand that education is a positive force in the society. An ignorant society is a society I don't want to live in.
Right.
A society that doesn't read the poems that you're teaching them, is for me a society that is scary, because you're moving towards something where we don't really have an anchor of I don't know, I guess I could call it humanity. But it seems like we're moving towards a society that's dystopic in certain respects, and a society without public education, to me, is a dystopic society.
I would agree with you, absolutely. I didn't become a teacher because it was a leisurely life or because it pays a lot of money, but just like you said, because it's a noble endeavor, and it is important. Yeah.
So, I feel like, both of us came from areas of the country that kind of produced the notions we're talking about. Kind of because I was raised in a what I would describe as a kind of culturally drab place. It made me desire for that kind of contact with the literary or the kind of artistic side of things, what we would describe collectively as the humanities. I think that's why maybe guys like us from the suburbs fear a world in which the humanities kind of disappear, because it means a world of where we grew up being the kind of the main culture in the society. And it's for me, at least, a disturbing thought. I like my hometown. I don't hate the suburbs of Southern California, but at the same time, I did come to New York, and I came to New York for a reason. And we've talked about how New York has gone away, and I feel like in a lot of ways we've framed a very cynical kind of set of ideas here, in that we've talked about New York going away and public education going away. But we are in a moment where I think those things are starting to become part of the conversation. I know that one of your big issues that I want to talk to you about, maybe on another show, but just maybe we can mention right now, is the minimum wage fight that's happening across the country. Because I can tell you that I've mentioned the minimum wage fight came up while I was at home in the suburbs a couple months ago, and I won't mention specific family members, but they were disgusted by the idea of people working at fast food restaurants making $15 an hour. They said, why don't they educate themselves and go get a better job if they want $15 an hour? Can you respond to that? If you were at that Thanksgiving table and Aunt Bessie said that, how would you respond? Because
Well,
15 bucks an hour seems like there's for those that don't know, the $15 an hour movement is starting to grow. I think this is the year that's going to become larger than it's been before. It's starting to kind of coalesce into a movement.
I think so, and I think Seattle is going to pass $15 an hour minimum wage for the city pretty soon. It's going to happen either out of the city council in the next month or so, or it's going to happen on the ballot over the course of the next 6 months or so. To respond to your family member, look, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there, I think, about the way that economies work. If that, people, not everyone can educate themselves out of these jobs. These jobs need to be done by somebody. And so if you're 100% people with PhDs, you're going to just have PhDs slinging hamburgers.
Right, which we're probably going to have anyway.
Which I'm sure we already have.
Right.
We certainly have a lot of people with bachelor's degrees, believe it or not, working in fast food restaurants. The number of people with bachelor's degrees working in fast food restaurants or working for minimum wage or just slightly above minimum wage is increasing dramatically.
It's staggering. It really is.
People are getting BAs and they're not becoming professionals, and that used to be the standard.
Well, when I graduated from UCSB, good school, good degree, it was a process of a couple years of realizing that nobody gave a shit that I had a degree from UCSB. Like literally, I could put it on a resume and people wouldn't even look at it. That was the part of the process of kind of the shocking reality of the economy in the United States is that, as much as we like to say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get a college education is no guarantee of a job. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go to college. You definitely have a better chance of getting something, but there's no it is becoming increasingly likely that people with bachelor's degrees will be working the type of jobs you're talking about.
Right. And to continue this idea of why $15 an hour, that is a sort of bare minimum livable wage in pretty much most places in the United States, and definitely most metropolitan areas in the United States. And, that is a huge problem. The idea of, and I hear it too, and I hear it most, I think, from working class people. And that is people who are maybe working in manufacturing, making $12 or $13 an hour, and their immediate response is,
"Who are they? Yeah,
should they get paid what I get paid when I'm somehow so much better than they are?"
Right.
And so, that is a huge problem with our culture in general. There's this sense that somehow because you work in McDonald's means that you're not as valuable as somebody else. Look, personally, I fucking hate McDonald's.
Yeah, right.
And fast food restaurants. Except some of the fast food restaurants in California, which are pretty good. In-N-Out Burger, for instance. Who used to pay their workers.
Yeah, In-N-Out's not a bad company. I mean, they're better. They're like the Costco of fast food.
Right.
You get a little bit more.
But look, it would not. It wouldn't break my heart if a $15 an hour minimum wage put every single McDonald's out of business.
Yeah.
That would actually be a good thing.
Right.
We don't need fast food. What we need are homes. What we need are public transportation. And every single person working at McDonald's can turn around and swing a hammer and become a carpenter or become a plumber. They can do all of those things. They can do work that will benefit other people rather than just work that sucks revenue up from the bottom and distributes it to the top.
What you're talking about is the kind of the transfer of this country from a manufacturing economy to a service-based economy where most people in the working class are instead of swinging a hammer or working in a factory, they're a cashier at Walmart or a cashier at Best Buy for $10 an hour, if that. From what I understand, if the minimum wage had kept pace with inflation, it'd be like something like $21, $22 an hour. So in that context, $15 an hour isn't asking for much.
If it had kept pace with inflation, I think it would be closer to 15. But I think you're thinking of productivity. If it kept pace with productivity, I think it would be higher. Something like
in either case, the idea of I think you're right, and that idea of romance comes back in a sense. The idea that a service economy is an economy where the mass of workers are doing meaningless work, and that meaningless work is essentially McDonald's is such a horror because it's every aspect of the transaction is horror, right? It's like the food being delivered is poison. The people working there, the people behind the production of the food are mostly migrant workers who are being treated like garbage. And the people that are actually working at McDonald's, that are the cashiers, are exploited and treated very poorly. And their wages are very low. So, there's not a lot. I think I agree with you in that there's not a lot I want to really save from that system beyond the workers themselves, right? Like, I don't feel like, I think the liberal would say, well, we need to get McDonald's running really well. You know what I mean? Whereas someone, it sounds like you're kind of coming from a more radical position. It's like, maybe we can rethink what's important in the society and the kind of work we do. I think that's a conversation we need to continue in this country. Is that, what kind of country are we? Because if we continue down the line that you and I have discussed, we're going to have a world in which there is this that most people are doing work that is meaningless. And not only that, but it's all it's doing is further entrenching this elite class that is sucking up all the wealth in the country. It's a horrifying vision, and I feel like, I don't want this show to be a bummer, because there's a lot that I feel like we have to hope about, and this $15 hour movement is raising consciousness about the idea of for me, the vitriol of people about fast food workers is amazing. Like
it's terrible.
The hatred of poor people in this country is really gross, because all these structural things that we talk about are not people's fault.
Yeah, and it's a product of capitalism, right? And it's a product. I think it's a product of human nature that manifests itself most under capitalism, and it is this sense of my value and my worth depends upon me being better than other people.
Yeah.
And having someone to look down upon and say, this person that serves me my hamburger is clearly, I'm so much better than them. Look at them. All they can do is work
which is such a fucked up position to take when you're buying food from somebody, to just have like pure hatred. Right. But I see that in New York. I often think it's like
terrible in New York.
That New York culture is bad in the sense that people are unfriendly. But I think it's definitely connected to that kind of economic reality. When I go, when I'm at Whole Foods, even the cashier at Whole Foods, and this is one of the good companies, right? This is like supposedly the green capitalist guy that's gonna that's going to change the way we do business in America and make it more humane. The Whole Foods workers don't get paid that much. And the contempt. And I understand the contempt, because I'm sitting there buying, a $5 block of cheese or a $6 block of cheese, which isn't even one of the expensive cheeses in Whole Foods. But there's that kind of class animosity is on the surface of that transaction. And at Duane Reade, it's even worse. I feel like an actual hatred between the two of us. That I'm not throwing hatred at this person, but at the same time, there's a real kind of feeling that these people are not happy in their jobs. And I try to remember that when I realize that. There are a lot of people who just expect the person behind the counter to just smile and be so happy and like, oh, what's their problem? When you realize these are exploited workers. Like, what you're coming in contact with when you go buy a cup of coffee in New York or go into Duane Reade is you're coming in contact with poor people, basically, who are barely able to make a living with the job they're doing.
Yeah, and definitely. But that almost never gets articulated as class, and too frequently it manifests itself racially and culturally. It begins to instead of having a class, you begin to get different cultures. Right. People identify with that position, and people identify them as somehow being inferior. And so that animosity is working both directions. People who work behind counters, who do retail. I worked service myself for 12 years, from the time I was 18 till I was 30.
What were you doing? Working in restaurants?
Yeah. Working in restaurants, bartending and waiting tables and bussing tables and washing dishes. I did everything except cook.
And you can witness the racial and social and class hierarchies in a restaurant like that, right? Absolutely. You can. The front of the house and the back of the house. For me, those were lessons that I probably would have drawn a lot more from if I had known more when I was working in those restaurants. Like, you can see the whole stratification of American society in those restaurants, from the back of the house, basically exploited migrant laborers, all the way to the front of the house, who are basically white kids going to community colleges, putting cash in their pocket for the summer. Very different kinds of people, and to see them kind of mingling is really interesting, because you're right, there is in America this kind of definition of yourself against other people. And I think we got to wrap it up here. But the idea in America, the paradox that I think we need to confront if we're going to overcome these problems, is we have an intensely individualistic culture that basically is like me. Look how awesome I am. I mean, it's been reinforced now through social media, and I'm not like a Luddite or a person that hates Facebook. But at the same time, there is a kind of culture that's becoming even more present in American society, that is, I got mine, right? That kind of thing that we talked about coming out of the suburbs.
Right. Yeah. Look, this 15 Now movement, I think, has the potential to create, once it gets discussions, it begins, creating discussions, people begin having discussions about it. It has the potential to create a lot of solidarity.
Across class lines?
No, within class lines.
Yeah,
because that's the problem, is that
there's no solidarity at all.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck if someone in the middle class or someone in the upper middle class really cares about
another upper middle class person.
Well, yeah, or someone wants to have solidarity with workers. Yeah. I don't care. What bothers me is the lack of solidarity amongst the class that makes up the great portion of society to begin with.
Yeah.
And so when we can create solidarity among that class, creating solidarity across classes is fine too, but it's most important to create it within that class so that they can come together and fight for their collective betterment. And I think this 15 Now movement, and I think the idea of a truly livable minimum wage that is actually pegged to a number, not just this pie in the sky idea of what a living wage is, and ideally one that must be pegged to inflation, otherwise it's meaningless.
And what is the federal minimum wage right now? $7.75?
$7.25.
$7.25.
Yeah.
I mean, it was $4.25 when I started working, and that was 20 years ago.
It was $3.45 when I started working.
Yeah, and it hasn't to know that it's $7.25 an hour now is kind of unbelievable, considering how expensive things are. Well, you mentioned Seattle. Seattle is I just taught a class this morning about what happened in Seattle in 1919. There was a massive general strike in Seattle where 100,000 people, workers, walked out of their jobs. They created something that would put Occupy Wall Street to shame, in that they kind of took care of each other, created health care, created milk stations for kids, meals, everything. And it scared the shit out of capitalists. And we to see that the Seattle movement that's happening now, associated with, her name is Sawant, right?
Shama Sawant.
Yeah, she's Seattle City Council member who's an open socialist. Yes. And she is, I imagine, part of promoting this 15 Now movement in Seattle, right?
She is at the forefront of the movement.
Yeah. And
it was a major part of her campaign.
Is it 15now.org? Is that where you can find that, or you can just Google 15 Now?
15now.org, yes.
Yeah, there are exciting things. So as much as James and I spent a lot of time figuring out how broken American society is in this last hour, I think that at the same time we're both kind of excited about the idea that people are becoming more aware of this, and this is through the ancient Mayans used to celebrate when things got really horrible, because they knew that was the moment of transformation. And I feel like if we can find a way to not be cynical, if we can find a way to not feel defeated, we can seize this moment. And I don't know how that's going to take shape, but we're going to live through some interesting times, I think. James, thank you so much for joining me.